Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
I had a ringside seat for the 1960s. I was a boy, too young to participate, but old enough to know what was going on. And they were crazy times. The Vietnam War raged to the comforting voice of Walter Cronkite. Martin Luther King marched with great strength and had a most beautiful dream and was shot for it. I stayed up past my bedtime in my PJs, sat on our living room rug and stared into a little 9-inch portable TV black and white screen and watched two astronauts with the coolest of astronaut names, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, land on the moon, while my parents sat on a couch and said, "This is history. This is history." And long-haired hippie freaks of the love generation rebelled against their parents in San Francisco and in my hometown. And while all this was happening, I was watching The Wide World of Sports, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and I Love Lucy. I took my parents' record player that was stereo, had two speakers, up into my bedroom, and it was the type with the spindle in the arm that you put the album on and it would spin and drop down. And there in my bedroom, the soundtrack of the 60s grooved itself in my mind like the tracks on the LPs that we were all spinning. And I knew every skip and every scratch in my siblings' albums. There was the Beatles and Hermit's Hermits and the Rolling Stones' Ruby Tuesday, then the harder stuff, Led Zeppelin and Jefferson Airplane's Serialistic Pillow, and Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits. And while I was listening to their 33s, I was spinning my own 45s, and I will say today, unless anybody can talk me out of it at the back door, the greatest 45 of all time is Hey Jude on side A and Revolution on side B. Two stations came into my little AM radio. One was WROW that played Lawrence Welk, and the other was WTRY Troy. And that played the top 40 with a smattering of harder stuff. It went all the way from Bill Me Up Buttercup to Purple Haze. 1967 was a banner year for me. It was a big year. It was the summer of love, though I did not know what that meant. I spent a fortune in nickels and got a whole collection of Topps baseball cards. Carl Yastrzemski of the Boston Red Sox won the Triple Crown, and I could see that I would do that too. I bought a Cowsills album. And Jim Morrison and the Doors came blasting through the mono speaker on my little AM radio. And I knew as an 8-year-old that this was some scary music with an awesome beat. And I knew as an 8-year-old that the Doors had gotten their name from a book by Huxley, which the high school kids were reading another book of his, a book called The Doors of Perception. And I knew that it was Huxley's exploration to see if drugs could bring one to self-transcendence. In the last chapter, he concludes no, but that message never got through. Now, the first song on the Doors' first album, as some of you will remember, was and is Break On Through to the Other Side. And the first time I heard it, I thought it was a cross between the thwack-thwack of the helicopter blades that I was listening to when I watched Walter Cronkite, these blades from Vietnam, and a chugging train. And Jim Morrison proclaimed with great ferocity the way of the psychedelic way. I'm looking, and I was looking during the reading of the gospel here for somebody in particular. Last week I had a conversation with a renowned rock critic named Dave Marsh, who lives in New Canaan. And Dave may well be sitting next to you, so if you don't know the guy sitting next to you, you may be sitting next to a famous rock critic. And Dave and I talked about the Doors, we talked about psychedelic rock and roll, and we talked about Van Morrison's Transcendental Blues. Then Dave said an amazing thing, really an unbelievably profound thing. He said, the desire was good, but the map was bad. And what he is saying here is that the desire, we have inborn in us a desire for transformation and transcendence. It is born into us. It's a holy desire, but the map was bad. Drugs are not the way. In fact, Jim Morrison, of all people, proved that because it killed him. Now, the mystics of the church, in fact, the mystics of all religions, attest to this inborn holy desire to lift up the veil and to see into the spiritual realm and to break on through to the other side. So the reason we are blowing the trumpets this morning is because Jesus broke on through to the other side. He steps out of the tomb and into the spiritual realm. And we rock today because the rock is moved and the tomb is empty. The choir works so hard, and we sing this great hymnody, Like Jesus Christ is Risen Today, because this is our break on through to the other side music, right? This is our soul music because it is music about the life of our souls. And there is a wild irony here, and it is this. If you think the stuff of psychedelic rock was and is wild, it is absolutely nothing compared to Jesus of Nazareth's life and nothing compared to Mary Magdalene's experience. There's an amazing irony, and it is this. The psychedelic stuff is not the wild stuff. The wild stuff is in the Bible. In the Bible. And today, we get a ringside seat to see that veil lifted, to see into the eternal. And what do we see? We see that Mary Magdalene, this unbelievably courageous woman who is from the town of Magdala on the Sea of Galilee, who has followed Jesus to the Passover, has been there for his crucifixion, watched it from afar, been there at his burial, and this morning she stumbles on the greatest spiritual event in the history of humanity, and she has absolutely no idea what's going on. Nobody said to her that morning, today is the big day. Nobody tells her, you're going to see spiritual beings on earth. So we hear in that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful rendition from John's Gospel that in the pre-dawn darkness, Mary gets up and she goes to the tomb. And in this case, the tomb is a cave with a small opening that you hear they have to bend down to look into. And in the cave, there is a slab where Jesus' body has been laid. And she saw them roll the cylindrical stone in front of the cave. And when she gets there that morning, the stone is rolled back. The cave is empty. Now just think about that for a moment. Imagine you had just buried your best friend and you went to pay respects to his or her grave in the darkness. And the dirt was up and the coffin was open and the grave was empty. So she does what we would all do. She bolts. She bolts to get her friends. And Peter and John run back. Peter, the bold one, not always the smartest one, even though he is my namesake, crawls down in, sees nothing, and Peter and John leave. Mary stays. She weeps. She bends over and looks back in the tomb, and now there are two angels there, one at the head and one at the foot where Jesus was laid. She has no idea what's going on, and the angels do not say to her, "Hey, Mary, good to see you. We are two angels from the heavenly realm sent here to deliver a message to you." That doesn't happen. She pours out her heart for them. She is grieving. And then she turns around, just turns her shoulders, looks around. And not only does Mary not recognize the angels, she does not recognize that it is Jesus standing outside the tomb. She doesn't recognize his body, and she does not recognize his voice. She thinks he is the gardener. So why doesn't Mary recognize him? So Jesus has been resurrected, not resuscitated. People who are resuscitated die and come back to life. That's what Jesus did with Lazarus of Bethany. But resurrected is a different thing. It is a more spiritual thing. It is an elevated thing. Now, to grasp what's going on here, we have to remember that Jesus' spiritual life is circular, right? He begins with God, right? And John says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. And then in Christmas, we celebrate the incarnation, right? And as John says, and the Word became flesh. And then for years, we have his life with us, and he lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. And then, with the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension, Jesus completes the circle of his spiritual life. So in Easter, we celebrate this arc of it, and this is what Mary stumbles upon, and what we have a ringside seat to see from afar. Now, Jesus' body looks different because he is different, right? So in the West, we talk about the triad of mind, body, and soul, representing the wholeness of who we are-ness, right? But in the East, they think of this differently, and here I'm thinking particularly of Bede Griffith. Bede Griffith was an amazing man. He was an Oxford Don, a Benedictine monk, and a theologian. And halfway through his life, he moved to India and started a Christian ashram so that he could study the wisdom of the East and see how it might come together with the wisdom of the West. And in the East, they understand the body differently than we do, the different spiritual body. And so there they have a triad that is the physical body, they have a subtle body, and then they have a spiritual body, 1 in 3 and 3 in 1. And so Bede writes that though Jesus' body has been destroyed, what happens at the resurrection is his subtle body is manifested. It has form and it has particularity. He's not a ghost, right? Now, in one of the most poignant pieces of all Scripture, Jesus calls Mary by her name. And that is what opens her spiritual eyes. Then she knows it is Jesus, and she says, Rabboni. Now, Rabboni, we translate it into teacher or rabbi, but it isn't all there. So that word Rabboni includes the sense of the presence of God. And then he says to her, do not touch me. From poignant to, do not touch me. Now, I like the old translation better, which is, do not cling to me, because clinging has greater implication in my mind. But whatever it is, whatever spiritual state that Jesus is in, he does not want to be touched. He does not want to be touched. I'd love to ask him about that. He does not want to be touched. But very soon after, and even next week, we're going to read that story here. He does want to be touched. Remember when he says to Thomas, touch me. Put your fingers in my wounds. So whatever spiritual state Jesus is in, it's one that we do not know a lot about, right? It falls into what in the East is known as the glorified body. It's a mystery. But Jesus says to her, don't touch me because I have not yet ascended to the Father. I am going to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So Jesus is risen but still rising, right? And Bede Griffith would say that his subtle body becomes his spiritual body at the ascension, when the materiality that we all know each other so well for becomes fully spiritual. And we just have simply not made enough about that in our tradition. So, hey, boom, boom, boom. The proclamation is bold, right? This is a bold proclamation. Jesus lives, and you are going to live too. We are going to live too, right? That is a bold proclamation. It's bold. We need it. Jesus is indestructible. You can kill him, but you cannot destroy him. His spirit is no more destructible than God's spirit or your spirit. Right? I mean, we're all going to die, but our spirits are going to live. And what does Mary see? Mary sees that we've got it all upside down. We are not human beings with spiritual lives. Most of us think our spiritual lives stink. It's the opposite way around, right? We are spiritual beings with human lives, and we're all doing the best we can with that human life. Now, Jesus says to Mary immediately, "Go and tell my brothers." Later, at the end of Matthew's gospel at the Ascension, he says, "Go and make disciples." So this go here, this double go is a big deal, because this is Jesus' invitation to all of us and to all of creation to join in on the cosmic consequences of the resurrection. See, our faith does not look back at a long-haired guru of the love generation, and it does not look back to a prophet, but it looks forward to the Son of God rising into the heavens. And here is the crazy thing that I didn't know when I was 8 years old listening to the radio. Jesus is the door. He even says in John's Gospel, "I am the door." If you want to know what it's like on the other side, look at Jesus. And then there is the truly mind-boggling thing, and it is this: we shall all break on through to the other side. And in breaking on through to the other side, we're going to join a peloton, an energy that has been opened for us by the Son of God. And you and me and all of us gathered, and everybody in all of creation, and in fact all of creation eventually, are going to break on through to the other side and join with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit in a deepest of deep spiritual unions and communions. And that is worth pondering and blowing your mind on.